Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. As the meeting of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin nears, one of the major questions remains whether Volodymyr Zelenskyy will be involved. Could this meeting mark a breakthrough in the ceasefire talks, or is Putin only playing for time again? We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. Pressure on Russian finance sector to increase as the EU's transaction ban enters into force. Russia issues controversial catalog featuring abducted Ukrainian children. Azerbaijan and Armenia closer to peace than ever. The United States and Russia could be on the verge of striking a deal to end Moscow's invasion of Ukraine without involving Ukraine. As we await details of a potential presidential summit, many in Ukraine fear an unjust peace could be forced upon them after years of Russian aggression. Joining me now from Kyiv is our correspondent Alex Kadier. Good evening, Alex. So what could a Trump-Putin meeting mean for Ukraine?
Well, good evening, Claudia. First and foremost, it could mean a pause in this war, a pause in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, in the attacks on Ukrainian cities and civilian infrastructure, and the loss of life on both sides on the front line. That, of course, is the stated objective of the United States, an objective supported by the Ukrainian side, and at least for now, engaged with on the Russian side as well. We've heard the US officials saying that the first step of this process would be a ceasefire, which then allows space for a longer-term peace deal to be struck. As you quite rightly said in your introduction, we still do not have a lot of official detail on what the deal could look like, what these negotiating lines could be at the moment. We've seen reporting in Bloomberg that the US and Russia are considering a deal where Russia would maintain control of all four of the Ukrainian regions it has partially occupied, as well as Crimea, something that has sparked fears here in Ukraine that a deal could be done over the heads of the Ukrainians themselves. Now, the White House has said the Bloomberg report is speculation and has also said that at every stage it will consult with the Ukrainians and with European partners. The Ukrainians, of course, hoping that those consultations are meaningful. Clearly, today was also supposed to be deadline day. It was supposed to be the day where the United States, if Russia did not make a concrete effort towards peace, would put tariffs on Russia, sanctions on other countries that trade with Russia. That has not yet materialized, but it is still early in the day yet in Washington, D.C. Clearly some fears here in Ukraine of a deal being done despite them. A bitter pill to swallow if territorial concessions are part of those deals. I put that very question to Ukraine's former deputy prime minister. I asked her what she made of these talks. Let's have a listen.
We are not sure that the discussion is right now about having this trilateral meeting, or whether this is a direct conversation between President Trump and President Putin only, over the heads of Ukrainians, over the heads of Europeans, which means that the whole agenda of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine is just being spared in vain. And I think that Ukrainian people have deserved their right to be present at the table. Moreover, it's about European security, and that means that European partners have to be present at the table.
So that fear expressed there, Claudia. I also put the question to her about the concessions that Ukraine may have to make in any peace deal. She said very clearly that there is also a need for Russia to be held accountable for its actions. Let's listen to that statement.
That has to be punished as an aggressor that has violated brutally the very basics of the international law. And just because Russian Federation has the nuclear power and that it's bigger, it is okay to give up for a smaller state its territories. I think if this is the case, the consequences will be drastic, not only for us, for Ukrainians. The consequences will be drastic for the whole world.
So that Ukrainian position expressed by the former deputy prime minister. We also heard from the Polish prime minister, Donald Tusk, who said that a pause in the fighting could be close, but crucially, a lot of the negotiating as things stand right now is happening behind closed doors. The Ukrainians, of course, wanting to be involved in the process. The details still yet not clear, so Ukraine will have to wait a little bit longer to know what this deal could mean for the future of the country. Claudia.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was Alex Kadier reporting live from Kyiv. Ukraine's Western allies are tempering expectations ahead of the meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. Finnish Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen told TVP World in an exclusive interview that Russia doesn't have a good track record when it comes to keeping any promises. Kazimierz Wysiak has more.
It's an honor to be with you.
As US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are still ironing out the details of their meeting on Ukraine, European officials remain cautious about the Russian leader's intentions.
They are masters in playing time and taking in any concession that Ukraine or anybody else would make towards them, and then just proceed as planned.
In an exclusive interview with TVP World, Finnish Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen blasted Russia's false narratives on the justification for its invasion, NATO's supposed expansion to the east, and Ukraine's aspirations to join the alliance.
That is complete bollocks. First of all, NATO, of course, is not threatening Russia. Second, it is the decision of the free people of, say, for instance, Poland, to decide whether they want to join a military alliance or no.
Still, the very idea of a face-to-face meeting between the American and Russian presidents, which would be the first since 2021, is cause for at least reserved optimism. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk is hinting at the possibility of actual progress in the peace talks.
I have this intuition that perhaps a freezing of the conflict could happen sooner rather than later.
Tusk's comment comes on the heels of his phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
I informed about my conversations with President Trump and European colleagues. We discussed the available diplomatic options and agreed to coordinate and work together for our common European interests.
But even if a ceasefire deal is reached, that still leaves plenty of questions. For example, who would safeguard the truce along a front line stretching more than 1,200 kilometers? France and the United Kingdom have already expressed their willingness to do so. The Nordic countries are also considering the idea.
Would Sweden send troops, peacekeeping troops, in the case of a ceasefire?
Yeah, well, we don't exclude that possibility, and of course we participated in this coalition of the willing meetings, and we have said there's three conditions that has to be met. One is some sort of U.S. engagement into such a mission, and then it's important that there has a clear rules of engagement, so we know what the exact purpose of it would be.
Poland, on the other hand, says it won't send any of its troops to Ukraine, as the country is already involved in securing NATO's eastern flank and serving as an aid transport hub for Ukraine. The meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin could take place as early as next week, with United Arab Emirates as a potential location. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Wysiak.
The EU's transaction ban targeting dozens of Russian banks enters into force today as part of the bloc's 18th sanctions package. The squeeze on Moscow's financial sector comes at another important deadline when Russia should either agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine, as stated by U.S. President Donald Trump, or reap some expensive consequences. Our EU correspondent Angela Skujins has more.
The EU and the US are exerting financial, political pressure onto Russian President Vladimir Putin in the hopes that he will end his ongoing invasion of Ukraine and to service Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy as he goes into these wafer-thin ceasefire talks spearheaded by US President Donald Trump, aiming to bring Putin and Zelenskyy face to face. What we know is that 22 new financial institutions have been added to the EU's list of blacklisted banks, meaning European operators are not allowed to engage with these banks directly or indirectly. It is part of the EU's 18th sanctions package, aiming to drain Moscow of its revenues, which are propping up its war machine. What we heard previously is that August the 8th, which is the day that these financial institutions are to be targeted, is the deadline for when US President Donald Trump stated that he he wants Russian President Vladimir Putin to enter that ceasefire with the Ukrainian president. Trump also stated that he would impose secondary tariffs on Russia if it doesn't go to the negotiating table. TVP World spoke to Finland's Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen. She stated that Russia is not to be trusted when it comes to these ceasefire talks, but the pressure could perhaps be working.
We have to be extremely cautious because I'm pretty sure that Russia wants to engage in peace talks now and perhaps prolong them for the time being, especially if it does hinder the United States from putting stronger sanctions on Russia.
Angela Skujins from the Belgian capital for TVP World.
Russia has taken another unforgivable step in terrorizing Ukrainian society. Not only did Russian capture children from occupied Ukrainian territories, these children are now featured in a twisted online adoption catalog created by the oppressors. Ukrainian authorities estimate that some 20,000 children have been kidnapped and taken into custody by Russia. Anastasia Yanchenko has more in her latest report.
Alexei, 10, friendly, polite, obedient, and Alexandr, 10, loves sports, hardworking. These are sample profiles of Ukrainian children posted on a Russian server in occupied Luhansk. The database includes about 300 mostly Ukrainian children, categorized by traits like disciplined or reliable, with the parental status field left blank.
You can find information about their obedience, that they are ready to do what they want. It's what the family want.
Ukrainian children have been appearing in Russian adoption databases since 2014. But after the 2022 invasion, this practice became widespread and more systematic.
Thousands of these kids whose parents were killed, now orphans, and have been placed in Russian orphanages and Russian families, and all of them have Russian citizenship, as well as the other kids, even in the families. It's a Russian strategy.
According to the testimonies of returned children, Moscow sends the abductees to re-education camps where they are forced to learn Russian culture and history in an effort to erase their Ukrainian roots. These actions have a harmful impact on the children's mental health.
It takes time and efforts for Ukrainian side to overcome the consequences of this propaganda, of this indoctrination.
Experts say Russia now quickly issues Russian passports to the kidnapped children and changes their names, making it very difficult to identify and bring them back. Older children may also be mobilized and pressed into the Russian military.
Russia recruits and mobilizes the new generation of Ukrainians and use it as a, let's say, meat in the front, in the military actions. It's a kind of, let's say, double crime.
Ukrainian officials say that at least 20,000 children have been deported during the 10 years of war. Only about 1,350 have been returned, mostly with the help of third parties like the Vatican or the United Arab Emirates. But the real number of abducted children is likely to be much higher. Earlier this month, Ukraine's military intelligence said it had hacked the servers of the Russian-controlled government in Crimea and found thousands of new records with names, addresses, and new Russian guardians assigned to the abductees.
Thousands of files with valuable evidence of one of Russia's biggest war crimes, the abduction of Ukrainian children, have been handed over to law enforcement. This information will help return the children and punish those responsible.
During the second round of the peace talks between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul, Kyiv handed Moscow a list of 339 forcibly deported children demanding their return. In March of 2023, the International Criminal Court in The Hague issued an arrest warrant after Vladimir Putin and Russia's Presidential Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova, over the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. This report for TVP World, Anastasia Yanchenko.
Berlin is halting all military exports to Israel that could be used in Gaza. The decision comes after Israeli authorities approved a plan to occupy Gaza City. Germany has been a longtime supplier of arms to Israel, but on Friday, Chancellor Merz released a statement saying these weapon deliveries were being cut off indefinitely. Merz said that Israel's current operations in Gaza don't seem focused on rescuing hostages or preventing civilian casualties. While Merz reiterated his longtime stance that Israel has the right to defend itself, rescue the hostages and fight Hamas as a legitimate target, he also said that he doesn't believe Israel's plan to occupy Gaza City brings it any closer to achieving these goals. Germany will, however, continue arms sales to Israel as long as they are used for maintaining general security or to defend from external attacks. As we continue with the program, Armenia and Azerbaijan are currently sitting at a shared table to sign a peace treaty in Washington, D.C. after years of conflict. It comes as part of Donald Trump's plan to bring peace to the Southern Caucasus. But does this peace come without a price tag? This is a joint report by Diana Skaya and Marek Steele.
Two historical foes, Armenia and Azerbaijan, sitting down for talks with the U.S. president. The result, according to Trump, a peace deal.
President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan will join me at the White House for an official peace signing ceremony. The United States will also sign bilateral agreements with both countries to pursue economic opportunities together, so we can fully unlock the potential of the South Caucasus region.
But Trump is not bringing peace to the Southern Caucasus without a price tag. On the table is a transport corridor through Zangezur, a narrow strip of Armenian land. It links the bulk of Azerbaijani territory to Nakhchivan, its exclave that borders Baku's ally, Turkey. Armenia plans to give the United States exclusive rights to the transit corridor that will be called the Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, a name confirmed by U.S. officials. For Iran, Zangezur is a red line. The corridor would bypass Iran entirely, slashing its access to Nakhchivan and weakening its regional influence. Tehran fears a direct Azerbaijan-Turkey link that could invite Israeli involvement and possibly cut off Iran's last border with Armenia, isolating it from the South Caucasus.
Although the meeting Friday is publicly more centered around a draft bilateral peace treaty, the real issue and the most promising element is actually the restoration of road and rail connections through southern Armenia.
Still, Friday's summit may mark a historic turning point in one of the world's longest-running conflicts. An unachievable peace deal in a conflict spanning 4 decades. Yerevan and Baku have been fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh since the late 1980s. After the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the dispute exploded into full-scale war. By 1994, Armenian forces had seized control of Nagorno-Karabakh. That uneasy status quo held until it didn't. Clashes resumed over the years. In 2016, a bloody 4-day war. In 2020, Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey, launched a 44-day offensive, seizing much of the territory under a Russian-mediated deal. Then in 2023, Azerbaijan launched a final assault, ending decades of Armenian governance in the region and triggering the mass exodus of over 100,000 ethnic Armenians. Friday's meeting between Baku and Yerevan is actually the latest in a new diplomatic push, one that is long overdue, and one without Russian involvement. Moscow, once the main power broker in the South Caucasus, has been sidelined amid its invasion of Ukraine.
This is a temporary situation, and we do expect Russia to at least try to regain its lost power and influence.
For the U.S., Friday's summit is a shot at transit diplomacy. For Russia, it's a sign of fading influence in the region.
When the Trump-Putin meeting will take place in a few days' time, a ceasefire could be within reach. But will the threat of secondary sanctions and increased international pressure force Putin into submission? Could this meeting change the dynamics of the war in Ukraine, and if so, when? Jan Brzezinski, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, joins me now to talk about the latest developments. Good evening, and thank you for joining me.
Claudia, thank you for having me on.
Pleasure.
And let me commend you for the TVP story that you did on the abduction of Ukrainian children. That's a war crime, and I'm glad you're keeping that on the front minds of people. We should not forget about that.
Thank you so much, Ian. It's incredibly important for us to be spreading these messages and let people know across the globe about these stories. They're very important. Let's take a look at the events which could possibly take place in a few days' time. Everything is still in preparation. There is a lot of discussion going on about the meeting. Trilateral, be it bilateral, we will see. Russians are clearly playing for time to avoid sanctions. Isn't this the right time to actually deal some deadly blows? I mean, it's Friday already. It's 20 minutes past 2 p.m. in Washington, and we haven't seen the secondary sanctions that were supposed to be introduced today. What's your opinion?
Claudia, you're absolutely right. I feel kind of a feeling of deja vu, or Groundhog Day, as we say in the United States. You know, just 3 months ago in mid-May, Zelenskyy was hosting the Prime Minister of Poland, the Prime Minister of the UK, the President of France, and the Chancellor of Germany in one of his offices in Kiev. And he had a phone call with President Trump in which they threatened Putin with massive, to use that quote, massive economic sanctions if Putin didn't agree to a 30-day ceasefire within 3 days. And Trump backed out of that agreement at the last minute. And that put egg on the face of the United States. It weakened the credibility of the transatlantic community, and it undercut Ukraine. And so I agree with your point. Today is a day we should see significant economic sanctions being imposed on Russia, so that when Putin goes to the table and sits with Putin, Putin fully understands that Trump is ready to exercise, willing to exercise, able to exercise the full scope of American power to force Putin to cease this war. For that reason, and for the reason that these sanctions are needed to weaken Putin's war machine. So yes, I agree with you. Now is the time to impose those sanctions, to exercise those sanctions as he threatened, so that he can have increase the likelihood of constructive negotiations when they meet next week, if they meet next week. If Trump fails to do that, Putin's going to come to the table even more confident he can do a repeat of last May.
So, as you mentioned, we are only days away from a potential meeting between both sides. Do you think after this meeting or during this meeting, we're actually running a risk of Putin convincing Trump not to impose more sanctions on Russia? And what would he have to offer for the U.S. president for that to take place?
Well, Putin's already got a big win. I mean, he's getting to sit down with the leader of the free world, the leader of the most powerful country in the world. That conveys a certain legitimacy. I'm not entirely comfortable with Trump conveying to him. Second, by being mano a mano, alone in the room, so to speak, without other players, Putin has achieved an ability to kind of pull the United States away from Europe and from Ukraine, to create a possible gap between the United States and its allies and its partners. Putin clearly wants to focus not just on Ukraine, but on a broader relationship, a renewal of a relationship, a reset of the relationship between Russia and the United States. And he signaled that, or his administration signaled that, when they described the Witkoff conversation with Putin earlier this week as one that focused not just on Ukraine, but on the prospects of broader cooperation between the United States and Russia. So Putin's coming to the table, not just looking for relief from pressure, but also hoping to further animate Trump's longstanding and well-articulated desire for deals with Russia.
So what do you think if a ceasefire would take place, if we would have Putin and Trump and Zelenskyy sit by one table, do you think that Ukraine would actually have to agree to territorial concessions? I mean, according to the recent poll, the most recent one coming from yesterday, 70% of Ukrainians want peace. 25% of Ukrainians are not willing to have peace if territorial concessions will have to be made. What's your opinion?
Well, one thing that worries me is that when you look at the Trump administration's rhetoric, it focuses, quote unquote, on stopping the killing, which is a legitimate objective, but it can't be the sole objective. If the sole objective, Trump kind of falls into the legacy of Chamberlain, who was focused more on preventing a war rather than thinking about how the prevention of that war actually prevents further wars. So when Trump comes to the table, hopefully in collaboration with the Europeans and above all the Ukrainians, they'll roll out a ceasefire, but one that is geared to resolve some very important issues. One, most importantly, that how to ensure Ukraine's security so that Russia will be deterred from further aggression. Two, it has to protect the principle of sovereignty that Russia has so brutally violated. So it would be a terrible concession, a terrible precedent if Trump were to agree or to pressure Zelenskyy to a degree to the permanent recognition of Russian sovereignty over the territories it has illegally seized from Ukraine. So a ceasefire cannot accept recognition of that territory. It can, quote unquote, allow it without recognition, backed by continued sanctions until Russia relinquishes those territory. And then, of course, there also has to be discussions on, for example, the children that Russia has abducted, that Putin has abducted, and then also the reparations that Russia owes Ukraine for destroying so much of its Ukrainian territory.
As we're looking at the meeting which is set to take place, do you think that President Zelenskyy is actually going to attend? Is he going to be invited to the table, or we're going to see this bilateral discussion which will take place between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and then perhaps leading to another meeting take place? And is it fair, especially from a Ukrainian perspective?
From a short answer, I don't know. The indications are, from the press reporting and my colleagues, is that the administration and Putin are focused on a sole meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy. Trump has signaled that he'd like to have that meeting followed by a trilateral meeting involving Trump, Putin, and Zelenskyy. What concerns me the most is not so much the meeting, but as what is the strategy behind this meeting. What is Trump going to bring to the table to ensure that a ceasefire leads to kind of a just and stable peace? And the Trump administration hasn't signaled anything in that regard, and that's troubling to me.
So we have Donald Trump, we have Vladimir Putin, there's also Volodymyr Zelenskyy, but what about Europe? What about some of these countries that actually joined the coalition of the willing, that are initially not involved into the talk, which is supposed to take place next week? What is going to be EU's extent of participation?
Well, in this round of negotiations, probably there will be no European presence. But a positive sign is that Trump actually reached out to a number of Europeans immediately after the Witkoff conversations with Putin, and laid out to them his vision for going forward. And there doesn't seem to be much pushback from U.S. European allies, including Poland, including Germany, including France, and the UK, against this way forward. The key is what's going to be going on underneath the table, so to speak, what's not going to be seen. The key is what kind of coordination is the Trump administration facilitating with our European allies? And right now, it sounds like there's a fair amount of conversation going on.
As our program is coming to an end, I wanted to ask you this final question. In your opinion, do you think that the war in Ukraine actually benefits a certain party, certain interests, to a point which is postponing reaching a ceasefire and peace? What's your opinion?
I think the reason why we haven't gotten to a ceasefire and to serious peace negotiations is because the West has failed to exercise the full weight of its power, its full massive overbalance of power against Russia. I've said this on the show earlier, so forgive me for repeating. You know, NATO is an alliance that has some $54 trillion in GDP. Russia's got less than 2. That's a 25-time differential. The alliance spends about $1.5 trillion on defense. Russia, even with this full-scale war and a war economy, spends probably well less than $200 billion. It's amazing we haven't used this geoeconomic, geopolitical, military overmatch to enable Ukraine to crush this invasion. It's in our power to do so. We just haven't demonstrated the political will to do so. That's what haunts me. And I'm hoping at some point in the near future, the transatlantic community will come to recognition of that and exercise that power. Because if it does, peace will be at hand. It will be fast and it will be swift because Putin will immediately get into a defensive position simply to protect the territory that he has seized. It's time for us to act now with decisiveness. We have the capability.
Peace will be at hand. How beautifully said. Thank you so much for joining me. Ian Brzezinski, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, was my guest. Great to have you.
If we exercise our power.
If we exercise our power. Thank you so much. And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you very much for joining me. And I do hope to see you back here on TVP World for more.